St. Gregory the Great, one of the great church fathers, gives an allegorical interpretation of Jesus standing on the shore. And according to this interpretation, he suggests that Jesus standing on the shore represents the stability, the peace that comes in the resurrected life, as contrasted to the disciples who are still laboring in that unsteady, that commotion of the waves on the sea. It's a nice image. It calls to mind, in my mind, the passage where Jesus is walking across the Sea of Galilee, and he invites Peter to step out of the boat. And Peter takes his eyes off the Lord and begins to sink. A reminder to us that in the turmoil of life, that we need to keep our eyes focused on the resurrected Christ, who gives stability and peace to us. The great church scriptural father, St. Jerome, gives us a little insight into their catch that day when he suggests that the number 153 is the number of fish that the ancients, the Greek zoologists, claimed that there were only 153 types of fish in the world. And so this points to the universal mission of the church that these fishers of men are called to gather people from every known nation, from every place, that none are to be left out. And that continuing mission is part of our mission today. Biblical exegetes will point also in today's gospel passage that the use of the word charcoal is only used one other time in the New Testament, in John's gospel, in that courtyard scene, which ties this passage with that passage. And in particular, it was in the presence of that charcoal fire in the courtyard that Peter denied Jesus 3 times. And it would be in the presence of this charcoal fire that he would affirm his love for Jesus 3 times. It focuses on the uniqueness of Peter's role among the disciples. For Jesus calls to mind for Peter what he had said at the Last Supper. Peter said to the Lord, "If all of these forget you, I will not abandon you." And yet he did. And so today in the gospel, Jesus reminds Peter of these words and asks him, "Do you love me more than these? The ones you said that would abandon me? Do you love me more than them?" And we would see this great leader in the church, the first vicar of Christ, the first pope, not lead, as he does in today's gospel, his friends to go out fishing. They were no longer fishermen. They were to be fishers of men. And so he is the one who leads the apostles in the Acts out into the community, to the point that all of Jerusalem was filled with the teachings of Christ. And when they are gathered up, those first apostles, those first bishops, it is Peter who stands in the midst of them and speaks on their behalf with courage to the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin was made up of the high priest and the 70 elders of Israel. They represent the old covenants, the old promise. And standing before them is the new promise, the new covenant, as Peter, as the vicar of Christ, surrounded by those first apostles, says to them, "Are we to obey God or to obey you? We will obey God." It is on this statement that the church places its founding precept for the church's right for civil disobedience. Because as important as was back in Jesus' day, so it is important for us to realize today that you and I, as disciples of Christ, cannot submit ourselves, subject ourselves to authorities, institutions, or legislation that goes counter to the law of God, to the voice of God. Just as it was their mission to bring the good news to the world, to shape the world, so it is our mission to shape the world. That is not just the leaders of the church, but all of the laity that are called to bring the gospel, the teachings of Christ into the legislation, that our civil law will not contradict the teachings of Christ. And if they do, we, like them, are called to live courageously in witness to the gospel. It is part of our mission. You see, they were trying to silence the voice of that infant church. It's not so different today. There are those who would want to silence the voice of God proclaimed by his body, the mystical body, by you. The contrast we have brought before us today is the depth of Peter's sin. You see, Peter had not only denied that Jesus was the Messiah, but he denied that he even knew him. And yet he was the one leading the church who was to proclaim that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. He wept over his sin. And in today's gospel, he is healed of that sin and will never be the same. Courageously, he would live his life and lay down his life in proclaiming the truth. Jesus asks him and asks us, do you love me? I asked this question at a second grade little program last weekend, and all the kids raised their hand. They love Jesus. If we love Jesus, we will feed his lambs. We will tend his sheep. We will feed his sheep. No doubt, a big part of the church's ministry has to be outreach to the poor. We need to care enough about our brothers and sisters that we are willing to sacrifice and suffer for them. And so a big portion of our ministries here is doing exactly that, reaching out to those in need, supporting ministries to those who struggle and are in pain. But make no mistake about it, at the heart of Jesus' ministry and the mission of the church is to proclaim the truth. What good is it if we feed the poor and do not feed them what can truly satisfy them? Peter was to feed Christ's sheep, was to feed the world by proclaiming the gospel. That was the commission given to him. He is to tend to God's sheep by guiding those sheep, by speaking the truth. And there is only one truth, and it comes in Christ. We too are called to this mission. We are baptized, born again, nourished, and sustained by the body and blood of Christ to go forth and evangelize. We do that through our missions, through the support of our ministries. And these days, we need to bring the face of Christ and his church into the world. And to this end, we are inaugurating here at St. Mary's, the St. Mary's chapter of the St. Paul street ministry, street evangelization. Through this ground-based movement, we will be bringing the gospel out into the community. in a non-confrontational way. This ministry invites us to participate in a formational process that helps us to answer people's questions, to know how to deal with certain situations. We have online training available. On April 30th of this month, I invite you to participate in a meeting. I hope to see all of you there. This is a way for us to bring the good news, to bring our faith and our love into the community around us, to those who are afraid to come into our doors, to those who need someone out there to welcome them back. And so I would encourage you to look at the bulletin in the coming weeks and see our advertisements for the St. Paul Street Evangelization Ministry. Now, it's all about our relationship with Christ. And when we talk about a relationship with Christ, we're talking that the first thing we need to always do is pray. St. Monica approached Bishop Ambrose and asked him. Now, Bishop Ambrose also was St. Ambrose. And she approached him and asked him, "What should I do for my pagan son?" And Bishop Ambrose replied to St. Monica, "Well, before you talk to Augustine about God, you need to talk to God about Augustine." And so we know that she did. She prayed for years for her son. And her son would become one of the great theologians, one of the great doctors of the church, a bishop in the church. He went from a life not unlike Father Donald Calloway's to a life of great service in love with God. The same must be true for us in our ministry to our brothers and sisters. You see, we need to love the world with the same love Christ had for those in the world around us. A love that realizes that we need to speak the truth to them because we care that they be set free from slavery and that they may live a life of freedom in the life of Christ. Every year at this time of the year, we prepare for our annual Eucharistic devotion, and our 40 hours comes at the perfect time for us in this Easter season as we prepare for the Pentecostal season, when we are called to go out and evangelize. And I invite all of you to take time to sign up on the board in the back of the church for time in the presence of Jesus so that we can hear his voice asking us, "Do you love me?" And so that we may spend time in dialogue with the Lord on how we will serve, how we will participate in the ongoing mission of the church. Christ asks us, "Do you love me? Do you love me?" We can, like second graders, raise our hands, not knowing what that love means. Or we can raise our hand like those parents among us know that there is nothing they would not do for their children. When we say we love Christ, as members of his body, we're saying that there is nothing that we would not do for our beloved. He's counting on us to bring his good news to the world.